And somebody that we can get into those topics with and so much more is John Bradshaw Layfield, JBL, and he joins the show right now. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm freezing cold. I live in Bermuda, and I'm now in New York in a snowstorm, so I could be the dumbest human being on the planet. But it's an honor to be on your show. I think Bubba Dudley is one of the smartest guys I've ever met, especially about the business, and I'm so proud of Bubba for his success with the show. It's great to be here.
John, my old friend, thank you very much for being on, and I got to return the pleasantry. For those who don't know, this is one of the smartest guys in wrestling and in business. And if you want to know where to invest your money, get in touch with JBL because he'll make you a millionaire overnight. It's always great to see you on Fox TV, and I really thank you for coming on the show. And the first thing I want to know from you, John, is this new rugby venture that you have going on. Do you own a team now? Are you part of a new league? Like, what's going on?
I do. I'm very excited. I have a partner, James Kennedy, and together we own the Rugby United New York. It's a new professional rugby team. In fact, it's the first professional rugby team in the history of New York City, and the league starts up April 21st. We have a deal with CBS Sports, just announced a deal with ESPN. It's an 8-team league, professional league. It's the first time it's been done on this level in the United States, and I could not be more excited about being an owner of a sports team and also being in New York City.
Let me ask you this. Were you a rugby fan for a long time, or is this something that's new to you?
No, I wasn't. Growing up in Texas, we didn't have rugby. We had the two sports. We had football and spring football, and that was about it. And when I went to Bermuda, I started working with at-risk gang-type kids, and I needed a sport to work with kids, and I visited a lot of places around the world. So rugby is the perfect sport. You just need a ball. The kids that are normally tough kids have a chance to get out some aggression. Unlike American football, you don't need 22 players and tons of equipment. It's very simple sport. It's a very simple sport to understand. And so I started up this program in Bermuda. And last year, our program was honored with, out of 7,000 programs, 17 countries for being the best with working with at-risk kids. And because of that, I've traveled all over the world. I've been to India recently to visit some slum programs dealing with soccer and with rugby. I've been down to South Africa in the shanty towns. I've literally been all over the world visiting sports programs that work with underprivileged children. And because of that, I work with a group out of New York, Play Rugby USA. Mark Griffin is one of the best in the world at what he does, right here in New York City. His stuff. He's taken some schools with a 50% graduation rate, and his program has a 100% graduation rate with 100% going to college. He does incredible work. And through Mark, I met James Kennedy, and James asked me to come along and be his partner. And I'm just blown away by James and the amount of stuff he can get done and the way he's put this rugby program together. And I'm here this week to work with James because our first home game is this Saturday at Gaelic Park at 7 o'clock. We play Boston.
Wow.
John, I remember back in the day being on the road together. And, whenever when you had a house show on a Sunday, we'd always try to watch football either before the show or at the arena. I never remember ever hearing you talk about rugby. When was the first time you got into it, and who introduced it to you?
Just in Bermuda. There's only a couple sports in Bermuda, like a lot of British overseas territories. There's cricket and soccer, and I'm not a huge fan of soccer. I do enjoy it. I watch the Premier League often, but not a big fan of cricket. You really have to grow up with it. So the only sport I could really watch was rugby that I really enjoyed, and I just fell in love with the sport. So it all came within the last 8 years as far as getting introduced to rugby. It's just from the local Bermuda rugby scene and falling in love with the sport.
John, talk about just, working with kids from tough environments and how important it is for them to, just go on the field to play and have some fun.
It's incredibly important, and it's one thing you see in inner cities around the world. The sports programs are really non-existent, and so sport is being used for so many things around the globe. There's a group, Spirit of Soccer, working in refugee camps in Syria and Iraq that's actually, when ISIS was going strong, was crippling ISIS' ability to recruit because these young men were wanting to go play soccer more than they were wanting to wage jihad for a religion, a fanaticism at least, that they may or may not believe in. And that's the essence of sport. Kids want to belong to something. And what I've found is if you can create something that has very high standards and is very hard to be a part of, and see, people say it's just the opposite when you're dealing with inner city kids that And I think it's either stereotypical at best or racist at worst that these kids are lazy. They're not lazy. They've just never had standards and principles put into place. And so if you put very high standards in place, the thing you're going to find is that you're going to get the best and the toughest kids. These are going to be your gang leaders. They're going to be leaders either on a sports field or they're going to be leaders in a gang. And what we try to do first and foremost is recruit these leaders. They're some of the toughest kids out there, but once they come along, the rest follow suit.
John, it really is great to hear you doing all this stuff. I remember talking with you early on when you started in Bermuda with all these kids, and I would see some of your tweets about you out there mowing the lawns of the fields, and you actually really you paid your dues in the rugby industry also. You've been doing it all, and now to have a team in New York, there's got to be a sense of pride that comes with that. I mean, in wrestling, we never put ourselves over, but you got to be proud of what you're able to do for these children and what you've able to done for yourself as a businessman and bringing rugby to New York.
What's really cool now is in Bermuda, we've had the program long enough that I see a bunch of these young men around town. They still call me Coach JBL, and now they've got families, they've got jobs, and I know a lot of these kids would have been lost probably to incarceration or worse, and to see them as young people with wives and kids and responsible citizens, and some of them, a lot of them still playing rugby, that's the greatest part. You know, I always thought that a coach, you don't judge them on necessarily just on how their team is now. Talk about when you're youth coach, you judge how those kids are 30 years later, what kind of fathers are, what kind of husbands, what kind of mothers, what kind of wives. That's how you think you should judge a coach, and it's so cool to see these kids. And last week, we talk about the professional side. I was out there watching our guys play Canada in our very first game. And Canada's a very physical side, and we matched them physically up front. It was just so fun to watch. And I'm sitting there at one point thinking, "Wow, this is my team." It's really cool. I'm very excited. James Kennedy, my partner, has given me a great opportunity. He's the man behind all this. I take no credit, but I'm proud to be associated.
You know, John, I'm a father of a teenager, and there's so many pressures that you have to compete with nowadays in schools. That's going on with peer pressure for a teenager, and then you're doing this sport, and you're doing with rugby, and you're working with kids from tough environment, and you talk about that it's almost like a choice. You know, you can be a leader on the sports field, or maybe with a gang. I mean, how hard is it to compete and to fight those pressures when there's so much on the line right now?
We had a young man a while back, when we first started the program, and we had kids who wouldn't even be on the same practice team as other kids because they were in different gangs. And our coach, who's in his 7th year there, Patrick Calla, who's just done a fantastic job. Patrick has done the eulogies at a lot of these kids' funerals who unfortunately have died. He's taken a lot of these young men to court because they don't have fathers. He's really been a mentor, a big brother, a father figure to these guys. And Patrick told me one day, he said, "Grab him." And I grabbed this young man. I knew something was wrong. I said, "Why am I grabbing you?" And he said, "I'm going to a fight." And there was a gang right outside of our practice field, and he was going over there to fight. And what he was doing was he was dropping his stuff off because he was going alone. He knew he was going to lose. And we've had kids stabbed. We've had kids murdered. This was a very serious situation. But he didn't want to get his stuff stolen too. But he's still going. I mean, a gutsy kid. So I stopped him, went and talked to the gang, ran him off. And I later grabbed one of our other kids, and I said, "I appreciate you stopping this young man, but I know you're in that gang. Tell me why you did this." And I said, "Because you're going to have problems with your gang now because you stuck up for this guy who's in a rival gang." And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "Coach, we're on the same team." And I realized at that point that we were getting through to these young people. That year we went undefeated. We didn't have any competition. In fact, we put all the other teams together in an all-star team to try to beat this team. It was the best team we ever coached. But they got it at that point. I realized we had created a rugby gang, a positive influence that these kids wanted to be more a part of and wear that jersey than they wanted to be in their old gangs that just cause trouble. And I think that's the essence of what these Sports for Change programs try to do.
That is a really great story to hear how you were able to put those two guys on the same page with their love of sport and not against each other in a gang. Let's shift just a little bit, John, away from the rugby. Get into wrestling for a second. What is your current level of involvement with the WWE right now?
I'm going to be at WrestleMania. I'm doing a table for three there with Eric. I think I'm going to be involved in some way, some part of WrestleMania. I think I'll be at the Hall of Fame. I don't know what all's been announced, so I'm not sure. And I'm not sure what all I'm doing. They just told me to be there that weekend. So I'm going to do about 8 to 10 shows a year, it looks like, with which is perfect. 52 weeks a year was way too much for me, and I got where the travel was just killing me. And I couldn't do it anymore. I was just tired of getting on planes. You understand how that is, Bubba. And so I finally thought I was going to be either 100% in or 100% out. And I worked out a deal with them where they would let me come in just for some of the big shows as I'm available. And I was at Tribute to the Troops. I was at Royal Rumble. I'll be at WrestleMania and do a few other shows throughout the year.
Are you able to stay on top of the product?
I watch it as much as I can. The problem is Bermuda is an hour later, and I'm 51 years old, and so it's too late for me. So I DVR a lot of it. Yeah, I do. I like to keep up with the. I love wrestling. You know, I've always loved wrestling. I was a fan growing up. One of my youngest memories was sitting with my grandfather on the couch watching wrestling on Saturday night, watching Fritz von Erich. And to this day, I still enjoy it. I think it's a great entertainment.
You know, it's funny, as I'm doing the interview with you now, I have World Class Championship Wrestling up on the TV, and I know you wrestled Kevin Von Erich at the start of your career. As somebody who's, you know, from Texas and grew up watching, you know, Fritz Von Erich, what was it like going up against a Von Erich at the beginning of your career?
One of the worst matches I've had was for the NWA, I think, North American Championship. And I think Kevin was gracious enough to put me over against Kevin. And it was terrible because I was just in awe. I remember standing across the ring. It was the first time I'd really been in the ring with a big-time star in a singles match. I tag teamed with Kerry, but I'm sitting there as the main event against Kevin, and it was just a terrible match because I'm sitting there just wanting to get a Polaroid with him. It was way before cell phones. And I was just in awe of the guy, and still am. Still keep up with him regularly. But I felt bad about it because I was in such awe of being in the ring with this childhood hero of mine that I didn't do my end of the match. And we later had some pretty good matches, but that certainly was not one of them.
John, which point of your career, was it your tag team run with Ron? Was it the work that you were able to do on your own? Which part of your career has the fondest memories for you?
I think the APA, because that was my first big break. And Ron was my best friend, still is. And being able to be on the road with Ron and being able to be in matches with Ron, I learned so much from Ron Simmons. Man, he's just as class of an individual as I've ever been around. You know, I've always said if you have the word man in your dictionary, it's not a picture of Ron Simmons beside it. You better sell your dictionary. He epitomizes everything great about the business and about being. He was a great sports star, but he carried himself so well. I really enjoyed that time being there with Ron. As far as professionally, maybe JBL more because I had a little more freedom and I was doing so much really cool stuff, especially with Eddie Guerrero, that professionally was maybe a little bit more, but both times to me were just wonderful. Unexpected runs and times of my life.
You know, you mentioned the WWE Network and you possibly doing a table for three. Could you give us any more information about that? Because I absolutely miss your Legends show that was on the network.
That was the most fun thing I did. That was my idea to put that Legends show together, and they gave me the chance with it. And I absolutely loved interviewing these great legends in a long-form interview. The table for three, I believe, is going to be Eric Bischoff, Bruce Pritchard, and I, is my understanding, unless they change it.
Nice.
Those two are good friends of mine. I think they just want us to sit around and BS together like me and Ron used to do.
You know, Dave, funny story. There's a term in wrestling, you know, called paying your dues, as there is in real life also. But the term paying your dues in wrestling means a lot. It has a lot different meaning to me and John, and the way you had to pay your dues back in the day in wrestling is a lot different than the way you pay your dues in wrestling today. When me and Devon stepped foot in the WWE, our first day, not only did we have to pay our dues all over again, we had to pay our dues directly to John and Ron Simmons. And let me tell you, that was a very physical way of paying your dues. So, John, thank you very much.
We had such a good time. You guys attacked us first, and Bubba had a 2x4 and hit me in the spine with it so freaking hard. my hands and my feet went numb. I thought, he's just paralyzed me. and then we got the receipt, what Bub was talking about on the interview session, and man, it was physical. And afterwards, we shook hands. We became best friends after that. You know, something funny is Ron and I were really the first major black and white tag team, at least in WCW and WWF at the time. You guys were the first in probably period as far as a major promotion, and we ended up becoming really good friends and having a great rivalry. It was really kind of cool. Since then, they've had all kinds of integrated tag teams, but before that, they really didn't. You know, Cowboys were with Cowboys, Natives with Natives, Mexican people with Mexican people. You know, it's just you kind of stuck ethnicities and groups together, and both of us and you guys going to the Hall of Fame, well deserved. Congratulations, kind of broke that mold.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, it was a lot of fun. So many great memories, so many great stories. You had mentioned about your run as JBL and your work with Eddie Guerrero. Obviously, we know what we got out of the ring, you know, what we saw in the ring with you and Eddie. Great storytelling, great matches. How was it working with Eddie behind the scenes? Was it a pleasurable experience? Was it difficult? What was it like to put together some of those classic matches that you had with him?
Eddie couldn't put together a match in the back to save his life. He's a lot like Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle is a guy who's all field, a Hall of Famer as well, and Eddie was the same way. And both those guys are just magic in front of a crowd. So you'd sit back there with Eddie. The first match we had that was such a bloodbath in the Staples Center, when right before the match, I asked Eddie, I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "I just don't like it." I said, "Don't like what?" He said, "I don't like the match." And Pat Patterson helped us put it together, and Pat's a brilliant guy. And so I went to Pat. I said, "Pat, Eddie doesn't like the match." And he said, "Well, what does he not like about it?" I said, "The entire thing." And he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Eddie wants to call the whole thing out there." And he said, "Okay, do it." We didn't even have a finish. We called the entire thing on the spot. And that's how Eddie was. Eddie was magic. I mean, it was like being with Shawn Michaels back in the early 90s. You know, he's just like grabbing an electric cord and just a pulse of electricity goes through you. That's Eddie. He would do stuff that on the fly that was just absolutely phenomenal. And backstage, we got along great. He loved the JBL character. He's the one that came up with more lines for me. He would call me in the middle of the night and go, "I got one for you. My ancestors came over here in a boat, not an inner tube." He goes, "You got to say that next Monday." Okay, great, Eddie, thanks. Eddie loved the heel JBL, and the reason it was successful was because of Eddie. And working with him on a personal and professional level was just awesome.
The ability to go out there and call the match on the fly, do you think that the guys of today have that freedom?
I don't think so. You know, but I don't know that for sure because even when I was back with WB, I certainly wasn't in the locker room. I was an agent for a short time. And so I don't think so. I think, you know, it's kind of funny because our generation was great with ad-lib. We're not good with scripts. If somebody gives us a script of certain things that have to be hit, we're not good at that. This generation is exactly the opposite. It's not necessarily that one is good and one is bad, but these guys are not near as good at ad-lib. They're great at scripts, but that's because they grew up doing that. So, you know, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I prefer the ad-lib. I think it ties you to the crowd more, but both certainly work.
Did you enjoy your time as a producer, or was the fact that everything was so scripted a problem for you?
I didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed certain things being put together. It's just so much. It's just tedious. You know, I never really enjoyed the art of putting a match together. I enjoyed the match, and I never really, you know, our group would see you out there, kid. That's all we used to say before a match. I wrestled Undertaker hundreds of times. We never once talked over a spot. Not one time. We'd talk about a lot of stuff before the match, but it had nothing to do with wrestling. And so it was all spontaneous. And so when I was having to be a producer and put all this together, that's the one thing I didn't like necessarily about the business. I enjoyed some of the satisfaction of seeing two young guys going out there and doing a great job. I was very proud of them for that. But as far as putting the match together, that was not a lot of fun for me.
What about being a commentator? We hear some great stories, but we also hear some horror stories about, you know, Vince McMahon being in your ear and everything. I mean, what was it like being a commentator?
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being around Vince. I know certain people. I know Mick Foley really didn't like it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being produced. Vince owns the company. And when Vince feeds you a line, it's because he may know something that you don't know. And so I never had a problem with that, because when he fed me something, I knew that I was going in the exact right direction. And it's not like he's feeding stuff verbatim. He's directing everything. So it's not like he's giving you verbatim verbiage. He's very good about talking in sound bites. He'll mention something about next week, or he'll mention something about a certain move, and then he expects you to expand on that. And I always enjoy that, because it told me exactly what the boss vision was and direction he wanted me to go with the commentary. Because wrestling commentary is different from football commentary. I've done both. Football, you try to lead the play. Wrestling, you're a step behind, and that's a real art to do, because you don't want to give stuff away. You're part of the show. You're not a commentator like a sport where you're trying to predict outcomes or predict moves or give things away. There's a real fine line there, and I thought it really helped having Vince in my ear.
A lot of guys over the years have said that it is difficult to be able to tell that story and have him in your ear the whole time. But I can tell you, as a fan of listening to you, I always thought you did a tremendous job of helping the boys tell the story, but most importantly, helping the boys get over it. And I don't think fans realize just how important commentary is, because whatever the boys are not able, the wrestlers are not able to execute in the ring to tell the story, you guys can follow up on. And, we talk about the greats like a Jim Ross or a Gordon Soley. You and Cole did a really great job together. Did you think you had that kind of chemistry with Cole?
I loved working with Michael Cole, and no disrespect to JR, because I didn't work with JR a lot, but as far as the best I've worked with, it's Michael Cole. He is such a professional, and again, no disrespect to JR, because I didn't work with JR a lot, so I wouldn't include him in that category of people that I've really worked with a bunch. Cole's the best I've ever worked with. He's so easy. He sets the table for you. He doesn't have an ego, so he's willing to be the straight guy, which is very important for a play-by-play guy to do, especially when you have a heel color commentary that goes along with it. I would talk to the boys beforehand, and I'd say, okay, what's your inflection point? What in the match has to be seen and what does not need to be seen? Because certain times you don't want to see certain things. And even if it's right in front of you, for the match's sake, you don't want to point something out. And because otherwise, that way you let the fans get there on their own. So it's a real art, and I really enjoyed working with the boys and trying to put them over. I'd tell you a funny story. You had the guys come out, the Legion of Doom wannabes, we always called them, Ascension. And people hated me over what I did with Ascension. The thing was, so much of the world wants things black and white. Fire bad, water good. It's very simple. It works in cartoons. It doesn't work in real life. You look at Walking Dead, you look at Game of Thrones. So when you had a heel bashing a heel team out of disrespect, we did the exact same thing with MVP. And he got over like $1 million. And I think Ascension was getting over at one point. They kind of backed off. I'm not sure exactly what happened. But sometimes you break stereotypes and molds. And I went to those guys and I said, listen, this is not personal. This is something we did with MVP, and this is something we're doing with you. We're going to take a shot on this. Everybody's going to hate you, including the heels. And hopefully that makes you a super heel out of it. And it worked to a degree. I'm not sure what exactly happened with MVP, though it worked really swimmingly. And so there's a lot to this art of just not always fire bad, water good, that to me is the real intricacies and the fun of commentary.
And one of the things that I thought you did a great job with in commentary is give a little history lesson as well, because you would mention a Nick Bockwinkel, the Freebirds, a Bruiser Brody, and I miss that right now in the commentary.
Well, I was around with those guys. So when you're old like I am, you tend to, things remind you of stuff. It's just, a wrestling match is one guy wins, one guy loses, or disqualification. So I've seen thousands and thousands of matches. So things remind me of the Freebirds, of the Von Erichs, of Bruiser Brody, of Stan Hansen. And so I always just kind of brought that up. I thought it was interesting. And after a while, it kind of became my shtick. I remember when I would say something about a famous actor, I would say something like Charlie Chaplin, who's been dead for 1,000 years, and I would do that on purpose instead of choosing somebody now that's famous, because I was the out-of-touch old guy.
John, any opinions on the big announcement that Daniel Bryan has returned and will be in the ring? Are you a fan of it, not a fan of it? What do you feel?
I couldn't be more happy for Daniel. I don't know the health implications. If he's cleared, I'm sure the health implications have been cleared or mitigated. I could not be more happy for him. When I first had to retire, I was miserable, and I came back for a little run. I was still hurt. Probably shouldn't have come back, but I got it out of my system, and I enjoyed it, and I realized that it was my time at that point to leave. Daniel's still a young guy. He misses being in the ring. I don't think he really enjoys being general manager. I don't know that because I'm not a mind reader, and I haven't not heard that from him. He wants to be in the ring. All he wants to do is wrestle. And I think if he has the ability to, I think that's wonderful for him. I was in New Orleans at that Yesselmania, as King called it, when Daniel finally won the championship. And to see 80-something thousand people chanting yes, it was just amazing. It's going to be awesome to see him back in New Orleans in the same building.
And last question for me, and I really appreciate the time today. I know there's a blizzard outside, so you giving us this time at this moment has been really, really great. But last question for me is The Undertaker. Looks like we're going to get The Undertaker, John Cena. Just a quick thought on the importance of The Undertaker in the ring and in the back in the locker room.
He's the best I've ever been in the ring with, by far. The best professional and best all-around professional that I've ever been around. And that's not to disrespect any of the other incredible legends I've been in the ring with. I mean, those guys are awesome. I just have that much respect for The Undertaker. My heart broke last year when he walked off, and I realized that maybe the last time I saw him in that ring, in that position. I think the match with Cena makes a lot of sense. I have no idea if it's happening or not. I have no inside information. It looks like it is, and I think it will be absolutely incredible. Cena is the right guy for The Undertaker at this point in his career because you want to be out there with guys who are really good, and I think Cena is the right guy. I think Cena is one of the best in the history of this business. I worked with John right when he first came in. And I remember going to events. It's a different match when you go from, say, 8 minutes. That's easy. You get a start, you get a heat, you get a comeback, you get a finish. When you go 25 minutes, it's a complete different match. And I was the first one to be with John during that time. And I remember going to Vince and saying, "This kid is awesome. He's unbelievable how good he is." And it's been such a great thing to see his success. I think he's the right guy for Undertaker right now. I think it'll be an incredible match if indeed it happens.
John, one of the things I've been trying to explain to Dave and our listeners, and please tell me if you agree or disagree and break down this logic. I told the guys that if Taker does wrestle Cena, it's going to be a much more fun and easy match for both guys. When Taker wrestled Roman, there was a lot of stress and anxiety. Taker had the stress and the anxiety of making sure Roman got over to that level he needed to be at. And Roman had a lot of stress and anxiety because he knew what was riding on the match. With this match, Taker versus John, they're going to be able to go out there, have fun, play their greatest hits, and just tear the house down. And I think you're going to get much better of a match than anybody is anticipating.
I could not agree more. I called that match with Roman, and I agree with you. Taker had a mission to go on, to go out there and make sure and get over Roman, which Taker has been getting over people for years and years and years. Back in the day, he was the measuring stick. You brought a guy in, you did 2 segments with Undertaker, and that either made you or broke you. My first match on Raw was with Undertaker for that very reason. This match now, neither of these guys have anything to prove. Neither of these guys have to get over. Neither of these guys need to get to a different level. They're already beyond everybody else. And I agree with you. I think this match, if indeed it happens, which it looks like it is, will be one for the ages. I think it's going to be something people remember the rest of their lives.
Follow him at JC Layfield on Twitter. I really appreciate the time. John Bradshaw Layfield, a great in the sport of pro wrestling. What you're doing outside of the ring is even greater, and we really appreciate the time today.
Thanks, guys. Bubba, could not be more proud of you, my friend. Congratulations on the Hall of Fame. And a brilliant person like you needs to be out every day talking, and that's what you're doing. And people, I'm sure, are getting a huge benefit out of it. Very proud of you, my friend.
John, I'm most proud of the fact that we have become friends, and you and Ron have been great to me and Devon from day one, and I look very forward to seeing you at WrestleMania at the Hall of Fame. Thanks for coming on, buddy. We appreciate it, and good luck with all the rugby stuff.
Thank you. See you at Mania.
You got it.